All right, I think we are good to go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Daf Yomi. We are going to be doing Gemara Shabbat, Daf Ayin Bet, page 72. We're going to get it up on the screen over here for all of the millions watching at home. And get it up on the screen. Let's do that. Come on. Don't let me down now. Okay, we've got it there. And we've got it there as well. Okay, so quite a tricky one today. We're going to be picking it up from the bottom of page 71. If I just scroll up a tiny drop over there. So we are in the 7th chapter, and we have been trying to ascertain what the story is when it comes to somebody who does something on Shabbos by accident. We might be familiar with the fact that there's a concept called mazid, where somebody does something on purpose, and then there's something called b'shogeg, which is where someone does something inadvertently, by accident. They have a lapse of awareness. Either perhaps they didn't know that there was such a thing as Shabbos, perhaps they knew that there was such a thing as Shabbos, but they didn't know that the action that they were doing was not allowed on Shabbos. And what's the complexity of this is, what happens if you you do multiple things in the same lapse of awareness, or you find out in between that it was not allowed, but then you went back to do it again and you completely forgot. So there's a lot of layers of complexity to this. I think we saw it last week together in the Mishnah, that you could sometimes be liable, you could sometimes be chayav to bring one korban chatas, one sin offering as a sacrifice, even if you had sinned or made the same mistake over numerous Shabboses. If you didn't know that there was such a thing as Shabbos, and then eventually you found out that there was such a thing as Shabbos and what you were doing was wrong, so then you may only need to bring one sacrifice. Whereas if you knew that there was such a thing as Shabbos and you just forgot about the action that you were doing, and you did it multiple times and found out in between and all the rest of it, then you might have to bring a separate sacrifice for each time that you've done it. So this machloket, these discussions have been happening almost for the last week, if I'm not mistaken, looking at this from all kinds of different angles. And so the Gemara today is kind of picking things up midway, and so there's a few things that may be helpful to know when we approach this page today. We learned in yesterday's daf that there's a machlokes, there's a dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding someone who violates, who does the same mistake multiple times, but he's never made aware of it in between. Right? So if you're doing it within one lapse of forgetfulness, then you would only be chayev, you would only need to bring a korban once. But what happens if you find out, let's say you do something a few times, and then you find out that it was never allowed, and you know what happens over there? So Rabbi Yochanan holds that if there was a breakage in the lapses of awareness, meaning you found out in between, and then you did it again, forgetting that it was not allowed. So Rabbi Yochanan would say that you have to bring multiple sacrifices, whereas Reish Lakish says if you have done however many lapses of judgment and made the same mistake over and over and over again, but you haven't yet decided and designated a particular animal to be the sacrifice that you're going to bring, then the only thing that would make a severance is if you, let's say, did the same mistake a few times, then you said, okay, this is going to be the animal that I bring as a sacrifice for the mistakes that I've made, and then you went back and did it another time. So according to Reish Lakish, only at that point could you be obligated and liable to bring multiple sacrifices. Whereas if you just had several lapses of awareness and then got told that you were not allowed to do that thing and then did it again afterwards, forgetting that you're not allowed. So because you haven't yet set aside an animal, you would still only be obligated one time. I hope that is somewhat slightly clear. Certainly hope so. So that's one of the things. And the other thing is a machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, which becomes relevant today, which was with regards to a korban asham. I'll explain more about that in just a second. But there's two types of asham. Right? The word asham sounds like the word ashame, and we translate it as a guilt offering, as a shame offering. So there's two types. There's an asham vadai, which is an asham where you definitely, excuse me, where you've definitely made the mistake in a few different categories. So it's a definitive sin, mistake that you've made in one of only a few select categories. And there's also one called an asham talui, which is a doubtful asham, which is where you think that you might have violated something, but you're not entirely certain that you violated something. And the thing that you think you have violated, if you knew that you had violated it, you would have to bring a korban chatas, a sin offering, but you're not sure if you've done it or not. And so in some situations, you would have to bring a kind of suspended korban called the asham talui, which is where you're bringing it just to err on the side of caution. You're not sure if you did the avera, if you made that mistake. So you bring this korban asham talui, which is brought in a case of doubt. Anyway, so Rabbi Akiva holds, when it comes to korban asham, to a definitive asham, he holds that you must know at the beginning that you have made the avera. You must be aware that you have sinned, in the same way that when you bring a korban chatat, you must have come to the knowledge that you have done something by accident. And so Rabbi Akiva holds with a korban asham that there's a similarity there, there's a parallel. One can only bring the korban asham if he has some kind of awareness. So what that would mean is, if a person was unsure whether he did an avera in the categories where you would bring this korban asham, and so you brought the doubtful asham as a temporary atonement, if he eventually discovers that he did do the avera, then according to Rabbi Akiva, he would say that you have to bring a new korban asham. So you brought the doubtful one, but then you found out that you made the mistake. According to Rabbi Akiva, you would have to bring a brand spanking new korban, because you now know that you've done that sin. Rabbi Tarfon, however, says that if you have brought the doubtful one, then that will cover you for the real one. And so if you do later find out that you did bring violate the avera, then you would not need to bring another korban. Hopefully that is of some benefit to help us understand what we are talking about today, because we pick it up with a statement by Ulla, and Ulla just kind of dives right in, assuming that we're going to have an understanding of what we're talking about. He makes a statement about a shifcha charufa, as we're about to see. A shifcha charufa is a maidservant who would have been given to a male Jewish servant while they are both working for the same master. And if they were to cohabit together, and if they were to live together, in these surroundings, she would actually be forbidden to everybody else in the same way that a married woman is forbidden to other people. So too would be this shifcha charufa. And so this would be one of the violations that if a person was to cohabit with her, then that person would have to bring a korban asham. So we said that there's a few different categories, right? So the asham would have been brought for. Rashi tells us three main categories that korban asham would have been brought for. One is the misuse of items from the Beis Hamikdash. One is for thefts, types of theft, and one is this shifcha charufa, where a person has had his way, shall we say, with a shifcha charufa, someone who had been previously forbidden to him because she was with another man. So that's where the Gemara picks up. So let's try and take us through this, and let's pray that I have some kind of awareness of what I'm talking about. So the Gemara says, Amar Ula. Ula says the following: Lemanda Amar Asham Vadai Lo Baya Yedia Bitchila. Okay, according to the opinion in the machloket that we were trying to talk about just before, according to the opinion that when it comes to a definitive asham, a guilt offering where you know that you've done something wrong, so it's for one of these three categories that we were talking about. So according to the one who says that lo by yedia techila, that you do not need prior knowledge that you have definitely sinned, so then you would encounter the following halacha. Okay, so the one who would say that you don't need to have the prior knowledge, you would encounter the following halacha. Turning to the top of page 72a. If a person was intimate on 5 separate occasions with a shifcha charufa, with this maidservant, then eino chayav ela achas. Then you would only be obligated to bring one guilt offering. So as we can see here, it fleshes that out in the Safaria text here. Even if he became aware of his transgression between each instance, because awareness is insignificant with regards to this sacrifice, he would only have to bring a korban asham one time. That's according, that's what Ula is quoting, and that's what it's going to be analyzing. Okay, so that's according to the opinion that says that you do not need to have yediyat techila, some kind of prior awareness. To which Maskif la Rav Hamnuna, to which Rav Hamnuna gives the following objection. Ela me'ata, if that's the case, Baal v'chaza or Baal v'hifrish korban, if you've got an example where a person has done what he has done on a couple of occasions, and then he's gone to designate a sacrifice, V'amar himtinu li ad she'evol, and then he says, all right, just hang on a minute, I'd like to be able to do this again, and to have the korban that I've set aside to be included. Hachinami de'eina chayav ela achas. So Rav Hamnuna says, really? You're going to tell me that he's only going to be obligated one time to bring a sacrifice? How could that possibly be? Clearly there's been a strong lapse, a strong interrupting period, which should require him to bring more than one. So the Gemara says, Amalei, Ma'aseh dela'acha hafrasha karmart. He says back to him, Ula says back to him, you think I was talking about where the guy has designated a sacrifice? Ma'aseh dela'acha hafrasha lo ka'amina. He says that I was not talking about where he has separated the sacrifice already and then gone back for a repeat visit. Obviously, I'm not talking about that. If there was a separation of the sacrifice in between, a designation in between, then of course he would have to bring multiple sacrifices. Says the Gemara, Kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylon, to Babel, he said the following thing. Amanda Amar, Asham Vadai Bai Yedia Betchila. According to the opinion the other side of this machlokes, that an asham vadai, definitive guilt offering, requires the prior knowledge. So he says as follows: So according to that opinion, if a person was to be intimate 5 times, he would require and he was made aware in between of each time that he had done that Aveira, then he would have to bring 5 separate guilt offerings for each and every one, because he holds that you have to have prior knowledge before being obligated in the korban, and since he has had this prior knowledge, he would be chayav 5 times. Amalei Abaye. Abaye says to him, Hare chatas de ba'inyan yediyah betchila. When it comes to a chatas requiring yediyah betchila, upligi Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, we see that there was a disagreement regarding this, and so I believe what we're trying to say over here is this indeed does it work a similar way, requiring yediyah for a chatas and requiring yediyah for an asham? Are we trying to say that that it works the same way? So the Gemara says, Ishtik, Rav Dimi had no response. He was quiet. So Amalei, Abaye says to him, so Abaye says, well, maybe we're talking about what you were saying, Rav Dimi, is with regards to where you have done the Aveira, you have designated a korban, and you're saying like Rav Hamnuna, and Rav Hamnuna said that obviously where you have designated a korban and then made the mistake, then you would have to bring multiple korbanot, amalei in. And Rav Dimi says, yes, that is indeed what I had in mind when I was saying this. So what comes out of this Gemara is the following. Kiasa Ravin. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar Hakol Modin, he said the following. We're going to see now kind of the 3 disputes, the 3 kind of instances, and what people are holding in each one. As I said, this is it's a proper head breaker, this one. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Hakol Modin. When Ravin came, he said Hakol Modin b'shivcha charufa. He said everybody agrees with regards to the designated maidservant. V'hakol Modin b'shivcha charufa. And everyone agrees by the shivcha charufa, by the designated maidservant. Umachlokes b'shivcha charufa. And there's also a disagreement, there's also a dispute with regards to a shivcha charufa. So what we're seeing is that there seems to be 3 different things in play, and in one instance everybody agrees to the same halacha, in another instance everyone agrees to the same halacha, and in the third instance there is a machlokes. So what are we trying to say over here? That well, we're going to see it, I think, as follows. So the Gemara says, am I in the right place? I'm not sure. Yes. Okay, so we're in this paragraph over here. Everyone agrees with regard to a designated, and there's a dispute. Fine. The Gemara elaborates. Thank God. Hakol modim b'shivcha charufa de'eno chai vela'achas k'de'ula. Everyone agrees that there can be an instance where a person is only going to bring 1 guilt offering, even if they have violated multiple times, and that is in accordance with Ulla. Ulla, who had said, since prior knowledge is not required, so they will only be chayav 1 time if they then find out that they had done wrong, even if they had done it multiple times. Okay. Says the Gemara, and everyone agrees with regards to a designated maidservant that if they had done it multiple times, sorry, this is Kedirav Hamnuna, right? Oh, so we're over here. So everyone agrees with regards to a shivcha charufa that if they had done it on multiple occasions and they had designated a korban, then they would be multiple. Then they would be chayav multiple times, and that is in accordance with what we saw from Rav Hamnuna. Umachlokes b'shivcha charufa, and there is a machlokes with regards to a designated maidservant. Regarding leman da'ama asham vadai ba'yidia b'tchila machlokes to Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. And there is a dispute, there is a disagreement when it comes to an asham vadai, whether it requires prior knowledge or not, and that is the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. And so, if you guys have made sense of all of that, then you should be giving the Daf Yomi share. But that is, as I said, that has been racking my brains, trying to fully understand exactly what is going on over there. We have to be honest, don't we? If I pretend that I know exactly what's going on, then I just look foolish. So, as I said, it's a tricky one for me. And unfortunately, when it comes to Daf Yomi, we don't necessarily have the luxury of time to sit there and really get to the teeth of what it's all about, because the pressure of the Daf Yomi keeps us rolling on. So I can only hope that in 7.5 years, when I come back to it, I will understand it ever so slightly clearer. Just to give you an idea of part of the reason why it is so complex, all right? This is not a tremendously long daf today. This is the page that we are currently working on, all right? And as you can see, this was where at the bottom of yesterday's daf, that one line is where we started. This is all Rashi trying to explain what the page is about. And over here as well, phenomenal amounts of Rashi to help explain the sugya, to help explain the topic. I'm glad he understood it. So, yeah, for any further consultations and questions, please consult Rashi. Says the Gemara as we turn the page onto Amud Beis, Itmar. We're exploring now, delving into something which is, yes, a bit more within my remit. I would say something with a bit more within my intellectual capacity. What we are talking about over here is we're going to be encountering a concept called misasek or mitasek, which means that you have mindlessly violated Shabbos, meaning you might know that there's such a thing as Shabbos, you might know that there's that the thing that you were doing is not allowed, but you were just kind of on autopilot and ended up doing something that you weren't supposed to do. So we are going to have a look at that, and we're also going to be encountering a concept called Omer Mutter, where a person does something wrong, but they had thought that actually it was permitted. So we're going to see what impact those kinds of things can have on what the halacha would be when it comes to things like bringing a korban. So let's have a look at the Gemara on Amud Bet now. We're on the second side. Let's get it up on the screen, make sure I'm in the right place. So we say as follows. The Gemara says, Niskavin hagbia es talush, v'chasach es hamechuba. So what would happen if you had just gone to basically pick something up from the ground? It wasn't connected to the ground because you're not allowed to uproot things from the ground. You were just going to pick something up. But when you did so, but when you did, you actually ended up detaching something that was previously attached from the ground. So let's say, Rashi says, let's say you've just gone to pick up a knife from the ground, but as you do so, you pluck some plants or you pluck some grass or something out of the ground. So what would the halacha be? So the Gemara says, Potter, you would be exempt. You would not need to bring a korban because you are misasek, because you are just kind of mindlessly doing the thing that you were doing. You had no intention at all to get anywhere close to uprooting something, and you just happened to do it. So the Gemara says, Potter, you would not have to bring a korban. But what about this? You went to pick up some stuff from the ground, like grass, thinking that it was detached. But when you picked it up, you realize that it wasn't, and so you uprooted this grass or these plants on Shabbos. So there it's a machlokas. Rava Amar, Rava says you are exempt, and Abaye says you're chayav. Says the Gemara, Rava Amar parta tahalo niskaven chaticha d'isura. Rava says you are pater, you are exempt because you did not intend at all to do this malacha of cutting. Abaye Omar chayav dahaka mikaven lechaticha ba'alma. Whereas Abaye says that that you are liable because you did intend to do some kind of picking up, some kind of cutting. It was just unfortunate that it happened to be attached, but the action that you were doing was definitely related to the result of what you did. So the Gemara asks, Rava says, Mina Aminala, from where do you get this? From where do I get this opinion from? And he quotes a brayso, Tanya Chomer Shabbos Mishar Mitzvahs. There's an instance where Shabbos would be stricter than it would be with other mitzvahs. And there are instances, or an instance where other mitzvahs would have a more stringent angle than the halachas of Shabbos would. He says, Shabbos mishar mitzvahs, Shabbos can be stricter than other mitzvahs. Shabbos asa shtayim behelen echad chayav al kol achas achas. Because you can have an instance where you do two malachas on Shabbos within one lapse of knowledge, and you could end up being obligated, liable, chayav, to bring two korbanos, which we'll flesh out a bit more soon. Masha ein kein b'shar mitzvahs, which is not the case when it comes to other mitzvahs, where if you had done the forbidden thing, you'd violated that mitzvah on a couple of occasions, but it was all within the time span of only making the mistake, as it were, once. So you'd only be chayav for one korban. But then we see but then we see that other mitzvahs can have a stricter application than the laws of Shabbos. In the case of other mitzvahs, if you had completely mindlessly, without any intention whatsoever, violated that mitzvah, you could still be chayav for korban. But that's not the case as we see here, according to Rava, with Shabbos, where you could mindlessly break Shabbos and not be chayav for the mistake that you made. So now we're going to unpack this a little bit more and understand this a little bit clearer. So the Gemara says, Adamar, what we have been talking about before, Chomer Shabbos Mishar Mitzvahs, that Shabbos has a stricter angle than other mitzvahs. Shabbos asa shtayim behen and echad chayav al kolachas v'achas, because you could do two malachas in one sitting, as it were, before you find out that they were not allowed. Chayav al kolachas v'achas, and you could be chayav for each one. Masha ein kein b'shar mitzvahs, which is not the case for other mitzvahs. So the Gemara asks, Echidami, what is the case exactly here? If you want to say that the case is that a person has done kitzira, which was cutting something off, and he has ground up those wheat kernels, so he's done multiple malachas, right, without finding out that what he was doing was wrong. Which you could say is comparable in another halachic topic to a person who is to eat chelev, fats, which are forbidden, and a person who eats dam, which is also forbidden. So there you've got an example where someone is doing something under the same general category of eating forbidden things, and they've eaten blood and fat in the same way that this guy has reaped and ground up. But we see in that instance that if it was the Shabbos violations, he would have to bring two korbanos, and also if he ate blood and fat, he would have to bring two korbanos. So that's not the case in other mitzvahs where he is not going to be chayav twice. There are other cases. So the Gemara answers, So what is the case of shar mitzvahs with other areas of halacha where you would only be chayav one time? What is the case? Says the Gemara, the achal chelev v'chelev. It's where he's eaten fat in multiple sittings. The kavasa gabe Shabbos the ava kutsira. Okay, but hold on a second. If it's where he's eaten multiple fats within one lapse of awareness, then the corresponding violation of Hilchos Shabbos would be where he's done reaping and reaping, where he's done the same halacha twice. But hang on a second. By the other mitzvahs, he's only going to be chayav once, and by Hilchos Shabbos, he's only going to be chayav once. So I'm still not getting fully where you're getting the concept that by Shabbos he could be chayav twice, but for other mitzvahs he would only be chayav once. So we're still not sure what our case is. So the Gemara says, "La'olam da'ava katsira utchina." Let's scroll down. Says the Gemara, it's actually where he has done katsira utchina. So he's done two different types of malachos. So then the Gemara says, "Umay masha'en kain b'sham mitzvah." So what is the case? I hear you cry of the other mitzvahs, and the Gemara answers, "Avodah zara uchad Rabbi Ami." It's with regards to avodah zara, and it goes in accordance with Rabbi Ami. And what seems to be happening over here is that avodah zara in another place is compared, or the seriousness of the avera is compared to the seriousness of the sin, the avera of avodah zara is compared to all other averas. So what seems to be going on is that we're employing this kind of linguistic styling over here to say that avodah zara is compared to shar mitzvahs, to all other mitzvahs. So that is the particular isolated example that the Gemara is bringing as its answer. And this goes in accordance with Rabbi Ami. The Amar Rabbi Ami, Zibach v'kita v'nisech. So when it comes to processing a sacrifice for idol worship, for avodah zara, so if he has slaughtered it, and he has burned up the incense, and he has poured wine, so he has served this idol with a multitude of processes and steps and stages and different types of actions, and he's done all of this b'ha'alama achas, and he's done all of this with only one lapse of awareness. He's only going to be chayav one time for the violation of worshipping avodah zara, even though he has done different types of worship in that lapse of awareness. Then he is going to be chayav one time. So that is currently how we are resolving the discrepancy. The Gemara asks, "B'may kimta, how are we establishing it?" Gemara answers, "B'avodah zara." Okay, but hold on a second. Ema sefer. But now we've got the sefer to explore. We've got the second part of what we had been talking about. Chome b'shar mitzvahs. That there's other mitzvahs which have a stringent and more strict application than the laws of Shabbos. Sheb'shar mitzvahs shagag b'lo miskavein. When it comes to other mitzvahs, if you make a mistake mindlessly, chayav, then you'll be obligated. Masha'en came b'Shabbos. But that's not the case for Shabbos, because if you violate mindlessly, then you don't have to bring a korban. So the Gemara asks, "Hai shagag v'lo miskavein d'avodah zara heichidami." What would the case be in avodah zara? If we're saying that now shar mitzvahs means avodah zara, then what is the case where you have done something erroneously without any kavanah whatsoever, and yet you still end up being chayav a korban? We need to understand what that case is, because ilema kisavo beis haknesesu. If you thought that the worship that you were doing, this temple, you actually thought it was a shul, so you were worshipping in what you thought was a shul, and it turned out that it was an idol worshipping temple, and v'hishtachaveh, and you've prostrated, and you've done acts of worship, but you thought you were doing them for Hashem. So in such an instance, you're not going to be chayav a korban over there. So that can't be the example that we're bringing, because if you were serving Hashem just in the wrong place, you're not going to be chayav a korban for that. Ve'ela dechazi andarta v'sagidla. So rather, it must be that he has seen the statue of an idol, and he has done some worship in front of that idol. So now the Gemara asks, "Hey Chidami, what are the cases of that?" Kabla alei loha mezidu. If he has accepted this statue as some kind of god, mezidu, then he has worshipped idols intentionally. Lo kabla alei loha, and if he has not accepted it as a god, and he was, just bending down to tie his shoelaces, lav klumhu, then he has not violated in a way that he is going to be chayav for a korban. So the Gemara answers, Ela me'ahava mira. Really, what he has done is he has bowed because he loved somebody else, or he was afraid of somebody else, and they had asked him to do this, and so out of love for that person or out of fear for that person, he had bowed down. Okay, so that's where we want to put it then. So that's going to be our isolated instance of where you could be chayav for mindlessly doing it. And when it comes to Hilchot Shabbat, if you mindlessly do something, then you're not going to be chayav. But there's a problem. This works according to Abaye, who says that one who bows down out of fear or love is liable to bring a sin offering. However, there's always those howevers. Ela Rava. When it comes to Rava, to Amapato, Ma'ikalameva, we need to then figure out what the case is according to Rava, because Rava actually says that a person who bows down out of fear or out of love is not going to have to bring a korban, right? So we now have to try and find an explanation that fits with Rava. So the Gemara answers, Ela ba'omer muta. It is where he has said that what he had been doing was actually permitted. And it wasn't permitted, it was forbidden. So it would seem that at that point then, if you had done something like Avodah Zarah, thinking it was permitted, and then found out that it wasn't, then you would have to bring a korban. But when it comes to Shabbos then, I guess, if you had done this action thinking it was permitted and it was not permitted, you just done it mindlessly, then you would be chayav. So let's have a look at the Gemara. Masha'en king b'Shabbos to pata legamrei, ad kan lo ba'imene Rava me Rav Nachman. Ela ilechiyuve chada ilechiyuve tarti. Aval miftare legamri lo. So the Gemara says as follows: that the statement in the Baraisa, that which we've been talking about, that we said Masha'en kain b'Shabbos to pata legamri. Okay, we have been trying to say that you are completely pater on Shabbos when you would be chayav for other mitzvahs. Ad kan lo ba'imene Rava me Rav Nachman. Rava was never asking this. Oh, let's scroll down. Rava was never asking about this to Rav Nachman. Rather, Ella, he had only been trying to figure out whether a person would be liable once or whether a person would be liable twice. But the thought of being completely pater, being completely exempt, he had never entertained in the first place. So this answer is still, it doesn't work. It is incompatible with the opinion of Rava. So that is why the Gemara at the top of page 73a explains the Gemara as follows. So at the point that, as we finish today, the Gemara is reaching a point where it is saying, so therefore we have to explain the Baraisa, the beginning of the Baraisa, we will have to say that Shah Mitzvahs means Avodah Zarah. So everything that we were seeing earlier, that still applies and that still works. Where Shabbos is stricter than Avodah Zarah because you could do multiple acts of worship for an idol and only be chayav one time, whereas multiple violations of Shabbos would yield multiple sacrifices. But the Sefer doesn't work like that. Sefer b'Shah Mitzvah. So therefore, at this point, we have to conclude that the second part, where other mitzvahs are stricter than Shabbos, we will have to assume that that is actually genuinely talking about other mitzvahs, but you'll have to stay tuned for today's daf, or tomorrow's daf, I should say, if you want to find out how the Gemara is going to unravel itself and unwrap itself even further. So that's all for today, ladies and gentlemen. Not every daf is easy. I never claimed that to be the case. But we'll see you all next time. for the Daf Yomi Shir.